Hey everybody, Morgan Decker here, and this is my presentation for the differentiated lesson plan. And so with this, I'll kind of walk through the student makeup in my class, and as well as sort of like my original plan, and then we can look at some student samples as well. So with this, I'll start by kind of going up to the top, and we can look at our content standards. So we started with the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in a text, including figurative and connotative meanings, and then ultimately, analyze the impact of specific word choices on meaning and on tone. Then I go through and highlight, WIDA's ELD standards. So I linked it with standard 1, so communication skills for social and instructional purposes, and then the ELL's ability to communicate information, ideas, and concepts that were needed for success in the content area. The pre-assessment I'll have linked to this so that you can take a look at that. In essence, this lesson was in regards to Romeo and Juliet, and so we were taking different words or different phrases, and then the students were having to discern what that meant, and then we were thinking about our knowledge of the overall play itself. Description of learners. So a little background. I have 30 kids in this 9th grade class. 10 of those are served, so 10 of those are sped, and then I have two current ESOL students and one former ESOL student. And so with this, which is also going to be attached for you, is kind of the breakdown of each of these students, and you can kind of read through that to see the background of that. For the annotated bibliography, I included explicit instruction, which is, really kind of extending the knowledge that students already have and connecting that to the current skills that we're learning. So, figurative language, a lot of kids already know about similes and metaphors, and they already have the background knowledge of Romeo and Juliet, where we've talked about what's going on and looked at these different literary phrases, and so being able to apply that is what that's just kind of talking about. Directed reading and thinking activities. So this would be a strategy that I would have my students use kind of at the beginning to determine the impacts that words, phrases have, and then how that relates to meaning and author's tone. So they would predict, monitor their predictions, and then we would have those discussions. And then last, which would be the thing that I feel like this lesson most effectively represents, is non-linguistic representation. So using something or other than a sort of written response to illustrate and convey meaning. So within my lesson, you'll see that I use illustrations a good bit. And so I talked about content targets, so students can determine figurative and connotative implications contained in a text. Students can determine the meanings of a variety of words and phrases within a text. Students can identify the overall meaning of a text. Students can discern the author's tone by word choice, and then students can ultimately extend their understanding of meaning and tone to discern how each impacts the other. So we'll see, as we go through, SPED students and ESOL students, they have their differentiated content objectives, which are on the same line, but could just kind of simpled down. So you'll see that for like an ESOL student, it says students can comprehend a given text by using context clues as a guide. So that doesn't simply say, that right off the bat they're going to be able to understand all of these different words and phrases that are used, but just getting the general gist, and then we can kind of scaffold and work up from there. We have our differentiated language objectives, and then we kind of get into the lesson itself. And so for our instructional activities, to kind of get this going, I had a gallery style walk up in my room. So I had 5 different phrases kind of spread out, and then I had students go to each large, sticky note, post-it note that had the word or phrase on it, and then they discerned meaning. So we already had the knowledge of the play. We already knew, what it was about, and so the students are able to, walk through, kind of work with those that are in their groups. This was just kind of a random mix-up of students, and then once that kind of gallery walk was over, we worked as a class, and we kind of had our discussion to kind of bring in, you know, what we predicted for this to be before we actually learned like how to discern the meaning. We connected our prior knowledge. And then that kind of led into our work session. And so for this, I had students, I gave them, you know, different words or different phrases from the play, and then they had to visually represent those phrases. So that required them to kind of, you know, analyze and think, okay, what was this phrase saying? And then in turn visually represent it. So that ties into that non-linguistic representation that was mentioned in the annotated bibliography. And so with this, they are in groups. So it's kind of that scaffold kind of mentality here, and it also supports what they had said that they liked in their learning inventory. A lot of them said that they worked better in groups, and so they were able to work on that. And then really within the last 15 or 20 minutes, I had my students complete the formative assessment. So this was the assessment and the resource that contained two, an original and then the modified. And so they had to kind of take their meaning, so their words, phrases, meaning. There was a visual representation, so that non-linguistic representation piece, and then ultimately they had to tie it back and kind of extend that, which we talked about, and then you know, apply that to author's tone and meaning and how they were able to tell that. So that was kind of a summary of my original plan. Definitely a change that I could see would be, you know, scaffolding this a little bit and kind of extending the lesson. It was too rushed really in one day, and so I did have to pick up and, you know, reteach and kind of extend more and provide more direct instruction on top of the instruction that I'd already given for my students, for them to be able to really understand, you know, what was kind of going on. But that's kind of the original plan here. I will upload this link as well as my differentiated lesson plan, as well as some student work for you to see. I'm going to include the informative assessment and then the pre-assessment so that you can see how their thinking changed. I definitely do think that my students grew and were able to kind of adapt as we went due to the lesson. And so I will include that for you. Thanks.